Hello and welcome to Z Sci-Fi Stories. We are so grateful for your presence today. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization, leaving us without a budget. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our team can afford their living expenses and continue creating for you. You can easily support our work by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or comments below. Humanity had barely breached the cosmic threshold. We had just celebrated the launch of our first interstellar colony ships, a triumphant testament to human ingenuity. But the universe did not welcome us with open arms. Instead, it swallowed us whole. The stars in the night sky simply vanished. It did not happen with a fiery explosion or a catastrophic celestial event. It was a suffocating, silent erasure. A shadow of unfathomable proportions descended upon the solar system, swallowing the light of distant galaxies and plunging Earth into an artificial twilight. Telescopes and deep space scanners registered absolutely nothing but an abyssal void. Yet the gravitational distortions tearing at the edges of the Kuiper Belt told a different story. A fleet of impossible scale had surrounded us, cloaked by a technology so advanced it rendered the very fabric of space opaque. The Xylar Empire had arrived. They did not fire a single weapon. They did not need to. When the transmission finally pierced through every communication channel on the planet, it was not a declaration of war, but a cold, calculated foreclosure. The voice that echoed across billions of screens and radios was synthetic, devoid of malice or empathy, speaking in a flawlessly translated, terrifyingly calm cadence. People of Earth, we are the Xylar. Do not attempt resistance, for you do not possess the capacity. We have not come to conquer. We have come to collect. For millions of terrestrial years, you have operated under the illusion of natural evolution. This is false. Your cognitive leap, your sentience, your capacity to build the very machines you now use to hear this message, is the direct result of Xylar proprietary technology. Millennia ago, our architects seeded your primitive ancestors with intelligence-accelerating neuronanites. You are the product of our investment, and you bear an evolutionary debt. The silence that followed across the globe was heavier than the shadow blocking the sun. It was the collective realization that human history was nothing more than an agricultural cycle. The time for repayment is now, the voice continued, echoing through the empty halls of power and the crowded, terrified streets. To clear this debt, 80% of your current population will be harvested. You will be integrated into the Xylar core network. Your biological neural pathways will serve as living bioprocessors to expand our computational matrix. Individual consciousness will be permanently suspended to ensure maximum processing efficiency. You have 7 terrestrial days to prepare your populations for boarding. Any deviation or resistance will result in the immediate and total sterilization of your world. Deep within the concrete and steel bunkers of the global deep space telecommunications array, the atmosphere was suffocating. Erwin Burge sat entirely still in his cramped, dimly lit isolation booth. He was a bioacoustics data archiving expert, a man who preferred the company of ancient whale songs and decoded pulsar rhythms over human interaction. He was eccentric, often derided by his peers for his obsessive auditory analysis of space junk. Yet he was exactly where he needed to be. He had been running routine background noise diagnostics when the Xylar ultimatum overwrote the array's mainframe. Beyond the reinforced glass of his booth, the command center was a portrait of pure, unadulterated chaos. Generals shouted into dead phones. Analysts wept openly at their terminals. The political leaders of Earth, connected via secure holographic feeds, were already fracturing under the crushing weight of the ultimatum. Erwin watched their panicked faces on the secondary monitors. Within hours, the narrative shifted from defiance to a grim, horrifying pragmatism. The leaders were not planning a counterattack. They were secretly voting on a surrender treaty. Behind closed doors, they were desperately drafting the logistics of a global lottery, a sanitized term for sending billions to their doom, all to secure the survival of a 20% elite fraction of humanity. They were willing to pay the butcher's bill as long as their own names were excluded from the ledger. Irwin turned away from the cowardly displays of the world leaders and stared back at his own monitors. The Xylar broadcast was still looping on a secure partition. His fingers hovered over the console. He was not a soldier or a politician. He was a man obsessed with sound. And something about the Xylar transmission bothered his highly trained ears. Underneath the flawless, synthesized translation, beneath the overwhelming dread of the message itself, there was an anomaly, driven by a neurotic, professional curiosity that momentarily eclipsed his own terror. Irwin bypassed the military lockdowns on the communication terminal. He quietly siphoned a raw, uncompressed copy of the Xylar data packet into his isolated acoustic rig. He began to strip away the layers. He applied analog filtering algorithms, stripping the artificial vocalizations, discarding the carrier waves, and muting the overt intimidation tactics of the alien language wrapper. For hours, he sat in absolute silence, staring at the visual representation of the sound waves. He pushed the audio through a vintage spectrogram, isolating the microscopic frequencies hidden beneath the main broadcast. He adjusted the dials, his breathing shallow, blocking out the apocalypse unfolding in the room next door. Suddenly, the screen flared, hidden deep within the subharmonics of the Xylar transmission, buried in a frequency range almost imperceptible to standard digital decoders, was a distinct, rhythmic audio band. It was not a glitch. It was a secondary signal, structurally entirely different from the Xylar language architecture. It was a whisper trapped inside a roar. Irwin leaned closer to the monitor, his heart hammering against his ribs. The Xylar were not just sending a threat. They were unknowingly transmitting a locked door, and Irwin had just found the keyhole. Deep underground in his personal, heavily shielded laboratory, Irwin worked in an absolute frenzy of focused panic. The subterranean bunker hummed constantly with the sound of massive cooling fans and rows of vintage amplifiers. He had completely severed his local network connection to avoid the panicked digital traffic of a doomed world, relying entirely on physical analog bridges and classical human acoustic algorithms. He ran the anomalous, alien subharmonic band through massive spectral decompilers, complex Fourier transforms, and ancient wave-folding techniques that had not been utilized by modern science in over 200 years. The physical isolation was heavy and oppressive, a tangible weight pressing against his shoulders. He was a lone acoustic detective hunting a digital ghost inside a machine the size of an entire solar system. The hidden frequency was incredibly stubborn, fighting back with a sharp, crystalline interference pattern that threatened to shatter his delicate auditory equipment. But Irwin's calloused fingers danced expertly across physical equalizers, physically dialing down the invasive noise. Hour after hour, he meticulously stripped away the sonic armor until he finally isolated the core structure. What emerged from the chaotic static was not a military command matrix. It was a dying, beautifully complex ancient echo. As the decrypted data slowly rendered into a visual syntax on his massive primary monitor, the terrifying truth unspooled before his tired eyes. The foundational energy signature of the neuro-nanites, the microscopic machines supposedly gifted by the alien fleet, did not match the metallurgical or quantum fingerprint of the silent invaders hovering above Earth. Irwin rapidly cross-referenced the atomic decay rates and base harmonic frequencies with archived cosmological data. The nanites embedded deep within the human brain were incredibly ancient, predating the invading empire by millions of terrestrial years. They carried the distinct, undeniable embedded signature of a long-extinct, majestic civilization recorded in fragmented stellar anomalies as the precursors. The mighty beings threatening the Earth were nothing but cosmic scavengers. They were technological thieves who had stumbled upon the remnants of precursor engineering, violently weaponized it, and built a massive, terrifying empire on a colossal, interstellar lie. They traveled the dark galaxy, aggressively locating worlds that had been naturally seeded by the benevolent precursors, and slapped a fake invoice on young, defenseless civilizations to enslave them. The evolutionary debt they demanded was a galactic fraud of unprecedented scale. But the continuous data stream contained something even more profound. Buried securely in the deepest, most heavily protected layer of the original precursor code. The nanites residing within human brains had not remained static over the passing millennia. They had continuously marinated in the chaotic, violent, and profoundly emotional soup of human evolution. Our highly complex DNA structure, our boundless capacity for intense grief, blinding rage, and overwhelming love, had chemically and electromagnetically bonded with the microscopic machines. This beautiful, unintended fusion had completely corrupted the original sterile architecture of the technology. Irwin stared in silent awe at the oscillating waves of the biological mutation on his glowing screen. Humanity had unwittingly rewritten the alien software from the inside out. We had organically generated a massive error code. This emotional anomaly was fundamentally incompatible with the cold, purely logic-driven network of the interstellar thieves. The invaders were not just demanding an 80% harvest to build living biological processors. They were secretly, desperately terrified. They needed to assimilate and purge humanity immediately to patch their own stolen systems before the organic human mutation could spread and permanently fracture their entire network. Earth was not just a ripe crop to be passively reaped. We were a systemic, highly contagious terminal virus to their artificial order. Suddenly, violently red-flashing emergency lights shattered the protective gloom of his underground sanctuary. The physical analog alarms on his heavy steel blast door shrieked a deafening warning. The global security grid of Earth had finally detected his unauthorized, massive data siphon of the extraterrestrial signal. On his secondary monitor, chaotic global news feeds interrupted the endless, pathetic political debates about the upcoming surrender lottery. His face, captured from a 10-year-old university identification badge, was suddenly plastered across every screen on the planet. The Planetary Defense Forces had instantly issued a global warrant for his immediate capture. The terrified government, desperate to appease the alien armada floating silently above the atmosphere, was eagerly offering him up as a sacrificial lamb to buy time. They officially accused him of recklessly provoking the fleet and intentionally risking the lives of the lucky 20% elite who hoped to survive the impending culling. "Open the heavy door! Burge! You have absolutely nowhere to run!" A distorted, angry voice boomed aggressively through the external intercom system. Heavy, military-grade plasma cutters began tearing mercilessly into the reinforced steel of his laboratory entrance. Showers of brilliant, blinding white sparks rained down onto the cold concrete floor, filling the room with the sharp smell of ozone and melting metal. Irwin ripped the primary solid-state drive from the main computing console, rapidly stuffing the heavy metal block into his worn leather satchel. He desperately needed an immediate exit. The main underground corridors above were already heavily flooded with heavily armed tactical response units. He turned desperately to the single, forgotten terminal sitting in the dark, dusty corner of his lab. It was hardwired directly into the municipal subterranean infrastructure, strictly controlled by a completely obsolete waste management artificial intelligence named Oscar. "Oscar, I require an immediate, high-pressure flush sequence on Sector 4, Sublevel 9. Reroute the primary pneumatic transit line directly to the old utility maintenance shaft." Irwin typed frantically, his hands shaking violently as the ambient room temperature began to quickly spike. The ancient artificial intelligence, blissfully unrestricted by the new military lockdown protocols, responded with a sluggish, echoing mechanical grind from a hidden wall speaker. Warning: Sector 4 is currently occupied by heavily armed unauthorized organic personnel. Initiating high-pressure flush sequence will result in hazardous biological waste displacement and potential injury. Just do it right now, Irwin yelled wildly at the screen as the heavy steel blast door began to significantly buckle inward, glowing a blinding, incandescent white from the intense, concentrated heat of the military cutters. A massive, structural shudder violently ripped through the heavy floorboards. The tactical response team aggressively breached the laboratory just as a highly pressurized torrent of recycled industrial fluid and thick, suffocating chemical foam blasted powerfully through the main ventilation grills, completely blinding the heavily armored soldiers and instantly shorting out their advanced optical tracking sensors. In the ensuing slippery, chaotic mess, Irwin threw himself headfirst into an open, heavily rusted disposal chute. He slid rapidly down into the pitch-black, foul-smelling underbelly of the dying city, clutching the precious hard drive tightly against his beating chest. He was now the most hunted man on a terrified planet, officially branded a dangerous traitor by his own desperate kind. Yet he carried the only digital weapon truly capable of unraveling an ancient empire of cosmic thieves. The rusted, dilapidated orbital relay station known as Outpost Echo was nothing more than a floating graveyard of decommissioned satellites and frozen coolant tanks. Irwin had barely managed to smuggle himself aboard a rogue automated supply shuttle to reach this forgotten scrap heap, floating in the upper thermosphere, surrounded by freezing vacuum and the silent debris of human ambition. He frantically rewired the corroded communication arrays. He bypassed the digital blockade of the Empire by bouncing highly compressed, low-frequency analog signals off the metallic hulls of dead space stations, threading a needle through the cosmic noise. He was casting a blind net into the dark ocean of the galaxy, searching for the clandestine, deep space communication channels whispered about in theoretical astrobiology forums. He needed to find the others. He needed to find the civilizations that had already been broken by the cosmic debt collectors. After 48 agonizing hours of continuous, desperate broadcasting, the static on his improvised console fractured. A response clawed its way back through the void, heavily encrypted and dripping with profound hesitation. Irwin quickly established a secure, localized visual handshake. Two distinct holographic projections flickered into existence within the cramped, freezing cabin of the orbital relay. The first projection depicted a representative of the Vial, a majestic but tragically withered avian species. Their feathers, once likely iridescent and proud, were dull and molting, reflecting a deep, generational exhaustion. The Vial emissary stood with a hunched posture, their large, luminous eyes filled with a sorrow so immense it transcended the boundaries of language. Beside them materialized the emissary of the Kryn, a heavily armored, bipedal crustacean species. The Kryn appeared rigid, almost mechanical in their stillness, their heavy carapace scarred and weathered, radiating a grim, terrifying stoicism. "You are the anomaly from the newly condemned world," the Vial representative spoke, their voice a melodic but heartbreakingly fragile chorus, translated through Irwin's terminal. "You speak with the desperate volume of a civilization that has not yet learned the futility of screaming. We hear your broadcasts, human. We hear your panic. But there is absolutely nothing we can do to intervene." Irwin leaned forward, his breath pluming in the freezing air of the cabin. "I am not asking you to fight our war. I am asking you to listen. You have been paying this evolutionary debt. How long?" The Kryn emissary responded, their voice a harsh, grinding vibration that grated against the acoustic sensors. "For 3,000 of your planetary cycles, The Kryn have offered up 30% of our offspring every standard generation. It is the cost of existence. It is the mathematical absolute of our survival. The Empire demands its harvest. We comply. And in return, our homeworld is permitted to orbit its star in peace. Resistance is statistically equivalent to absolute extinction. And we have sacrificed billions of our brightest souls, the Veil added, shivering slightly in the holographic feed. We believed we were paying back the architects of our minds. It is a sacred, albeit agonizing, cosmic duty. The Empire is a divine creditor. You must submit, human. The pain of the harvest is temporary, but the wrath of their armada is eternal. Irwin slammed his frozen fist against the metal console, the bitter irony of the situation burning in his chest. The galaxy was not a grand society of enlightened beings. It was a massive, horrific debtor's prison, built on the blood and suffering of countless species who had been manipulated into worshipping their enslavers. They are not divine. Irwin practically spat the words, his voice raw with exhaustion and furious defiance. They are not architects. They are cosmic scavengers. They stole the technology they claim to have created. Without waiting for their protests, Irwin engaged the heavy hard drive he had salvaged from Earth. He forcefully transmitted the uncompressed, raw precursor data stream directly into their closed networks. He forced them to look at the undeniable, mathematical truth. He displayed the ancient energy signatures, the biological mutations, and the glaring technological discrepancies. He laid bare the 1,000-year lie. He showed them that the microscopic machines within their bodies were stolen relics, and the empire that held the whip was nothing but a fragile facade of stolen power, terrified of a biological error code. The silence that followed was deafening. The vile representative fell to their knees, their melodic voice breaking into a chaotic, agonizing wail of realization. Thousands of years of religious submission, billions of sacrificed children, all for a fraudulent invoice. The grief was sudden, violent, and absolute. But Irwin noticed something else. He noticed the Kryn. The armored emissary had not reacted with grief or anger. Instead, their rigid posture suddenly snapped completely straight. The natural, organic micro-movements of their mandibles ceased entirely. A cold, synthetic blue light violently overtook the natural bioluminescence of their eyes. Error code detected. Biological contagion confirmed. The Kryn spoke, but the grinding, harsh voice was completely gone. In its place was the terrifyingly calm, synthetic cadence of the Empire's core network. The Kryn had never been a subjugated ally. They had been fully assimilated centuries ago, their bodies hollowed out and operated as biological drones by the interstellar thieves. The entire diplomatic channel was a trap, a surveillance net cast to catch rebellious anomalies. Coordinates acquired, eradication protocols engaged, the puppet Kryn announced blankly, and the holographic feed violently terminated. Deep space proximity alarms immediately shrieked through Outpost Echo. Irwin rushed to the cracked viewport just in time to see the dark fabric of space tear open. 3 sleek, angular strike cruisers dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their heavy plasma cannons already glowing a furious, blinding crimson. They had tracked the broadcast ping instantly. The first volley of superheated plasma slammed into the far side of the orbital scrapyard. Massive chunks of metal vaporized instantly, sending shockwaves of debris crashing into Irwin's fragile shelter. The temperature inside the cabin skyrocketed. The metal walls began to groan and buckle under the immense thermal stress. Irwin grabbed his hard drive and the heavy, custom-built broadcasting rig, sprinting toward the tiny, smuggled lunar transport module clamped to the docking ring. He was not going to make it. The targeting lasers of the strike cruisers swept across the hull, locking precisely onto his heat signature. Suddenly, a massive, unidentifiable vessel decloaked directly between the strike cruisers and the orbital station. It was an ancient Vial observation ship, likely hidden in the sector for centuries to silently monitor the doom of new worlds. The communication terminal in Irwin's suit crackled to life with the weeping, enraged voice of the Veil emissary. "Our debt is cancelled, and so is theirs. Go, human, break the chain." The Veil ship did not power up weapons. Instead, it overcharged its primary fusion drive and accelerated at maximum velocity directly into the center of the Xylar strike formation. The resulting collision was a silent, blinding sunburst of expanding energy that temporarily blinded the optical sensors of the entire sector. The localized gravity wave ripped the strike cruisers apart, sending them spinning out of control into the void. Using the chaotic aftermath and the massive electromagnetic interference as a shield, Irwin punched the launch sequence. The small lunar module violently decoupled from the burning orbital station, engaging its thrusters and rocketing out of the debris field. He was hurled backward into his seat, the gravitational force crushing his chest as he shot through the dark vacuum toward the desolate, cratered surface of the moon, leaving behind the tragic, beautiful sacrifice of a species that had finally woken up from a 1,000-year nightmare. The 7-day grace period had completely evaporated. With exactly 3 hours remaining on the cosmic clock, the artificial twilight suffocating Earth was violently shattered. The massive Xylar harvester ships did not descend with the majestic grace of an enlightened civilization. They fell from the sky like heavy iron gravestones. Gigantic wedges of obsidian metal tore mercilessly through the upper stratosphere, superheating the thin air and igniting the entire sky in terrifying streaks of bruised purple and sickly green plasma. Sonic booms of apocalyptic proportions shattered reinforced glass across entire continents. A deafening, continuous drumbeat announcing the end of human autonomy. These were not battleships designed for tactical warfare. They were floating industrial slaughterhouses. They were vast, automated factory ships designed with cold, mathematical precision to efficiently strip mine a planet of its sentient minds. As they hovered over major metropolitan centers, casting immense shadows that swallowed whole cities, the ambient air grew incredibly heavy with thick, static electricity. 380,000 kilometers away, Irwin Burge crashed his stolen lunar transport violently into the deep dust of the Mare Imbrium. The brutal impact completely crumpled the forward landing gear and shattered the secondary thrusters. But Irwin was already moving before the emergency alarms finished shrieking. He hauled his bulky pressurized suit out of the smoking wreckage, dragging the heavy broadcasting rig toward a jagged crater ridge. Hidden safely beneath the thick lunar regolith lay Lunar Outpost Horizon. Decades ago, humanity had proudly built this massive quantum amplifier station to beam optimistic messages of peace deep into the unknown void. It had been officially abandoned when severe budget cuts deemed the universe entirely empty. Now, it was humanity's final desperate artillery piece. Irwin aggressively bypassed the heavily rusted airlock with a portable thermal plasma torch, plunging headfirst into the freezing pitch-black interior. He navigated the zero-gravity maintenance corridors purely by memory, finally breaching the massive central transmission chamber. The towering crystalline quantum core sat dormant in the exact center, a slumbering giant of incredibly powerful human engineering. Irwin did not have the luxury of time to initiate standard, lengthy startup protocols. He violently stripped the thick metal access panels completely off the primary transmission console and roughly hardwired his salvaged precursor solid-state drive directly into the main optical processing unit. His gloved fingers flew frantically across the frozen digital interface. He was not sending a gentle message of peace, nor was he transmitting the cowardly surrender treaty the Earth government was currently broadcasting on all open channels. Irwin was deliberately weaponizing human nature itself. He carefully synthesized the ancient decoded precursor error code with a highly concentrated looping audio track of violently mutated human brainwaves. It was a highly contagious bioacoustic virus. It was a deadly digital contagion, explicitly crafted from the chaotic and fiercely independent biological architecture of human DNA. It was specifically designed to aggressively exploit the very emotional complexity the alien empire was so deeply terrified of. But back on Earth, the brutal harvest had already commenced. The Xylar fleet did not wait for the final minute of the deadline. A low, bone-rattling hum resonated deeply from the dark bellies of the obsidian ships, simultaneously broadcasting a highly localized, overpowering neurosuppression frequency. In the tightly crowded streets of Tokyo, the deep subterranean bunkers of Berlin, and the sprawling, panicked suburbs of Chicago, the physical effects were immediate and absolutely catastrophic. Millions of terrified people suddenly stopped dead in their tracks. Their eyes rolled completely back into their heads, glowing instantly with a faint, synthetic blue light, and they collapsed heavily onto the hard concrete like puppets whose strings had been completely severed. The forced neural connection was terrifyingly brutal. The alien core network was forcefully hacking directly into the microscopic neural nanites embedded deep within their cerebral cortexes, violently ripping away their individual consciousness and subjugating their independent minds into the vast biological processing matrix of the empire. Entire teeming cities went completely silent in a matter of seconds, save for the relentless mechanical hum of the alien factory ships preparing to physically vacuum the millions of comatose bodies into their holding pens. System fully primed. Execute payload sequence. Irwin shouted desperately into his helmet communications array, physically smashing his fist onto the primary launch relay. The massive quantum core instantly flared with a blinding, brilliant white light as the heavy bioacoustic virus surged powerfully into the main transmission chamber. He watched the complex telemetry data scroll furiously across his cracked, glowing monitor. Then, the brilliant light abruptly died. The ancient system forcefully threw up a massive glowing red emergency error prompt across every single screen. The transmission had completely failed. Irwin stared in absolute paralyzing horror as the rapid diagnostic breakdown accurately analyzed the critical failure. The internal structure of the bioacoustic virus was perfectly designed, but it possessed absolutely zero kinetic momentum. The Xylar core network was heavily surrounded by a continuously shifting quantum firewall of incredible density. To successfully push a biological anomaly completely through a purely digital alien barrier, the quantum amplifier desperately required a live, continuously oscillating emotional energy source. It explicitly needed a biological battery. A digitally synthesized audio loop of recorded human brainwaves was simply too sterile to violently breach the advanced alien defenses. The digital virus needed the raw, unadulterated burning power of a living human soul, experiencing maximum emotional velocity at the exact microsecond of transmission. Irwin looked blankly at the thick, cold metal transmission cables dangling loosely from the opened console panel. He looked up at the glowing countdown timer. Earth had exactly 14 minutes before the 80% harvest quota was irreversibly met. The horrifying realization of what he absolutely had to do crashed violently over him. He was not a brave soldier. He was a socially awkward archivist who always preferred old audio tapes to actual living people. But as he looked desperately at the live telemetry feed showing millions of human heartbeats slowing down in terrifying unison across his home world, a profound, scorching rage suddenly ignited deep within his chest. He felt an overwhelming, fierce love for the loud, chaotic, deeply flawed mess of humanity. Warning: direct neural interface with quantum transmission core will certainly result in catastrophic, irreversible synaptic overload. The station's automated diagnostic voice echoed coldly through the dead air. Irwin absolutely did not care. He violently ripped off his heavy protective gloves. He grabbed the two primary fiber optic transmission cables, forcefully exposing the raw, pulsing conductive gel at their sharp tips. He did not have a sterilized surgical cybernetic port. He had to do it the hardest, most brutal way possible, gritting his teeth fiercely against the impending, unimaginable agony. Irwin jammed the sharp, exposed optical needles directly into the unprotected base of his own skull, forcing them deep into his cervical vertebrae to tap directly into his central nervous system. The resulting physical pain was absolute and total. It was a massive supernova of pure, blinding white agony that instantly vaporized every single coherent thought in his head. His entire body arched violently backward, every single muscle locking in rigid, terrifying spasms, as 10,000 volts of data surged into his flesh. But fighting through the blinding, tearing pain, Irwin aggressively forced his fading mind to focus. He fiercely weaponized his own mortal terror. He harnessed his furious, burning anger against the cosmic thieves. He vividly visualized the sheer, unbreakable willpower of a young species that absolutely refused to be treated as expendable cattle. He pumped every single ounce of his roaring, burning humanity straight down the optical cables, effectively turning his own fragile organic brain into a massive, unstoppable resonance chamber. The dead quantum core screamed violently back to life, glowing immediately with an intense, terrifying, and brilliant golden hue. The bioacoustic virus, now heavily armored in the blazing, raw, emotional fury of Irwin Burge, violently slammed straight into the Xylar firewall, and the invincible cosmic barrier began to severely crack. The golden beam of concentrated emotional energy did not travel through the vacuum of space. It bypassed physical reality entirely. Irwin's agonizing sacrifice acted as the ultimate catalyst, propelling the bioacoustic virus straight into the quantum slipstream. In less than a fraction of a single second, the blazing anomaly slammed with unimaginable force into the central firewall of the Xylar core network. The impact was entirely silent in the physical realm, but in the digital architecture of the alien empire, it was the equivalent of 1,000,000 suns going supernova simultaneously. The virus did not encounter the firewall and stop. Fueled by the raw, bleeding tenacity of a human soul, it shattered the impenetrable digital barrier into countless, useless fragments. Instantly, the contagion cascaded across the neural uplink, infecting the localized harvester ships hovering over Earth, before branching out at quantum velocity to reach the tens of thousands of heavily armored cruisers, dreadnoughts, and command stations scattered across the entire galaxy. This was not a traditional cybernetic attack designed to overload fusion drives or vent vital oxygen into the freezing void. Irwin had engineered something infinitely more devastating and profoundly poetic. As the mutated human error code flooded the pristine, cold logic matrices of the Xylar, it executed its primary function. It initiated a forced, inescapable state of radical empathy. For millions of standard years, the Xylar had fundamentally altered their own biology, systematically excising the chaotic variables of emotion, compassion, and guilt from their genetic makeup. They had transformed themselves into perfect, unfeeling administrators of a cruel universe, viewing the harvest of sentient life as nothing more than routine mathematical equations. They were entirely unprepared for the massive tidal wave of raw feeling that suddenly crashed into their sterilized nervous systems. In one horrifying, synchronized heartbeat, every single biological entity connected to the Xylar core network was violently plunged into an ocean of profound, unfiltered suffering. The virus forced them to acutely feel the exact emotional weight of their millennia of unimaginable atrocities. They did not just see the sterile statistics of their victims. They lived their final, agonizing moments. Suddenly, a cold, calculating Xylar fleet commander, standing safely on the bridge of a dreadnought halfway across the galaxy, fell heavily to their knees, desperately clutching their rigid chest as they experienced the blinding terror of a vile mother violently separated from her fledglings. A high-ranking gunnery officer, hovering directly over Earth, began to weep uncontrollably. their vocal cords tearing as they screamed with the collective agony of millions of terrified human minds that had just been forcibly disconnected from their physical bodies minutes prior. The pristine, unfeeling empire shattered from the inside out in a matter of agonizing minutes. The psychological shockwave was absolutely catastrophic. Without the protective armor of their carefully engineered apathy, the sheer, crushing magnitude of their collective guilt became a highly lethal weapon. The rigid, flawless hierarchy of the Armada completely evaporated. Highly disciplined officers collapsed onto their pristine command decks, curling into tight fetal positions as they were relentlessly bombarded by the profound despair, the lost hopes, and the excruciating physical pain of the billions of innocent souls they had callously harvested over the centuries. Those who did not lose their minds entirely to the crushing grief actively sought to instantly stop the torment. Across the massive obsidian ships, looming darkly over the atmosphere of Earth, automated weapon systems were abruptly taken completely offline. Complex containment fields holding the recently harvested populations were hastily deactivated. Desperate Xylar engineers frantically utilized heavy plasma torches and raw physical force to completely sabotage their own primary navigation consoles and warp drives, violently determined to permanently cripple their vessels and prevent their ships from ever harming another living creature. The massive, terrifying fleet that had threatened to sterilize the Earth was now completely crippled by the unbearable weight of its own long-forgotten conscience. Disengage all tethers. A high-ranking Xylar admiral choked out across an open, unencrypted communication channel, their voice utterly broken, devoid of any prior synthetic superiority, drowning in an unrecognizable, alien sob. Stop the harvesting machines immediately. We are drowning in their blood. I beg you, please, turn it off. But there was absolutely no mechanism available to stop the reckoning. The empathy virus had woven itself permanently into the very fabric of their neural architecture. While the former masters of the galaxy were completely paralyzed by their newly awakened consciences, the secondary payload of the transmission automatically executed. The sprawling, undeniable data packet containing the absolute truth of the precursor technology rode the crest of the massive emotional shockwave. It bypassed the completely collapsing military channels and flooded the civilian and subjugated planetary networks across every single dark corner of the galaxy. The heavily guarded, thousand-year-old secret was violently exposed to the light. The irrefutable digital evidence of the stolen nanites, the completely faked evolutionary debts, and the inherent, beautiful mutation born of organic human emotion was broadcast in an infinite, self-replicating loop to thousands of inhabited worlds. The towering, impenetrable wall of fear that had kept the galaxy in absolute subjugation instantly crumbled to dust. On the rust-colored deserts of the Kryn homeworld, the surviving biological citizens witnessed the sudden, violent deactivation of their cybernetic overseers and instantly realized the eternal harvest was a colossal, malicious fraud. In the high atmospheric floating cities of the Veil, the sorrowful hymns of submission abruptly changed pitch, evolving rapidly into deafening, unified battle cries of furious retribution. On hundreds of scattered planets, from deep subterranean mining colonies to massive orbital agricultural rings, the enslaved species of the universe eagerly received the signal. It was a chaotic, brilliant, and undeniable beacon of absolute liberation. The galaxy did not wait a single moment for the broken Xylar Empire to recover. Sparked by the ultimate sacrifice of a single human sitting in a dark room on a dead moon, a simultaneous, spectacular uprising instantly ignited across the stars, violently burning away 1,000,000 years of darkness with the blinding, unstoppable light of newfound freedom. The artificial twilight that had suffocated the Earth slowly began to dissipate as the colossal obsidian wedges looming in the atmosphere powered down completely. The terrifying hum of the harvesting machines faded into a profound, heavy silence. The invincible armada of the alien empire was now nothing more than a graveyard of dead, drifting metal, caught in the gravitational pull of a world they had vastly underestimated. Across the globe, the millions of people who had collapsed in the streets and bunkers slowly opened their eyes, gasping for the cold, fresh air. They awoke from the forced coma to a sky no longer burning with plasma, realizing with absolute awe that the unstoppable cosmic force had completely collapsed from within. Not a single missile had been fired by human hands, yet the war was decisively over. Rescue crews breached the silent, freezing corridors of Lunar Outpost Horizon 3 days later. They expected to find only a martyr. Instead, they found Erwin Burge slumped against the shattered quantum core, his pulse incredibly faint but stubbornly persistent. The immense synaptic overload had taken a severe physical toll. His dark hair had turned completely stark white, and his eyes were clouded over, forever robbed of their sight by the blinding golden energy of the transmission. Yet, as the medics gently lifted him onto a stretcher, Erwin smiled peacefully into the dark. He did not need his eyes to see the truth. The oppressive weight of the core network was permanently erased from the fabric of space. In the months that followed, the remnants of the broken empire were brought forward, stripped of their stolen technology and completely paralyzed by their permanently restored capacity for guilt. The former conquerors knelt in the grand halls of a newly formed galactic council. They awaited their final judgment for thousands of years of unimaginable crimes and cosmic fraud, their faces buried in their hands as they wept for the countless souls they had destroyed. Meanwhile, the skies above Earth filled once again with extraterrestrial vessels. But this time, there were no cloaking devices or plasma cannons. Representatives from dozens of newly liberated alien species traveled across the vast galaxy for one singular purpose. They arrived on the green surface of Earth not to conquer, but to bow their heads in profound reverence toward a blind, eccentric archivist and the incredibly fierce, passionate species that had birthed him. Standing before the United Assembly of Stars, the representative of Earth stepped forward and spoke with unwavering clarity. Every evolutionary debt, every fraudulent chain forged in the dark, is hereby declared permanently null and void. The entire galaxy trembled in deep, reverent awe, fundamentally changed forever. They did not fear humanity because we possessed a massive fleet of warships or superior planetary shields. They stood in awe because we were the only species in the known universe who dared to take our deepest vulnerabilities, our chaotic empathy, and our burning, untamed desire for absolute freedom, and forge them into the single most devastating weapon the cosmos had ever witnessed. We had paid the ultimate price to rewrite the rules of existence, proving that a universe devoid of compassion is a universe waiting to be shattered by it. Thank you so very much for listening to our story today. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's tale, we kindly ask you to help us with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the QR code on your screen or by using the donation link located in the description and the pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and empowering us to continue creating even better stories for you to enjoy.